Well, hey there. I would love to chat with you for a few minutes on what's going on with this machine gun ruling coming out of Kansas. But before we talk about that, this video is made possible by our amazing friends at Defiance Action, arguably one of the finest action makers in the business. And this beautiful gun, this delicious piece of goodness, was put together by arguably the greatest rifle builder ever to live in the universe, Rod Weber of Weber Customs. Check them both out, Defiance Actions and Rod Weber. So here's what I want to chat on. A lot of the Second Amendment-y legal guys are chatting about it. What's going on with this ruling? And I've got a bunch of messages. I've shared a few little pieces on it in social media. And I've got messages from people like, hey man, machine guns are crazy and we're going to have more people dying. Maybe. I don't know that. But that's the issue with looking at something under a constitutional microscope. We're comparing two different things. Might people get hurt? Yes, that's over here. If we don't like that or we think that people might get hurt, then we need to change the Constitution. We don't just interpret the Constitution, as often happens, to suit our whims or our needs. In fact, I went deep. I went deep into ancient Greece, and I found something that Epicurus said. And he said, any means by which we can secure protection from other men is a natural good. Dr. Cyril Bailey, Cyril was a scholar, I believe, turn of the century, that kind of reinterpreted these ancient Greeks into more modern vernacular, kind of like the Bible has translations. And he said that any means by which we can secure protection from other men is a natural good. He defined it as this: because the goal of living a happy life is the highest value, it is right for men to protect themselves from the oppression of others in any way necessary. Epicurus also said this: natural justice arises from a covenant between men for their mutual advantage to refrain from harming one another. Bailey's interpretation: the justice which arises from nature is a pledge of mutual advantage to restrain men from harming one another and to save them from being harmed. That's pretty cool. The justice which arises from nature is a pledge of mutual advantage to restrain men from harming one another and save them from being harmed. We've got this idea, right, that government has to protect us from everything. We've also got this idea that our union is perfect. As I've been reading about this, the question that keeps coming up to me, or that I'm pondering, is, are we still a republic? It has been repeated often as our founders were sitting in Philadelphia deciding what our government was going to be. Somebody said to Benjamin Franklin, right, one of the sharpest minds, one of the most well written, widely published guys of the founding, they said, Dr. Franklin, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government do we have? And he yelled back, a republic if you can keep it. I don't know what he sounded like. That's what he sounds like to me in this setting. But a republic if you can keep it. They knew history. These were learned men. They were smart men. They were not perfect, though. I just spent the last couple of days, I visited Harriet Tubman's grave. Man, what a moving experience. Auburn, New York, is where Harriet Tubman was laid to rest. Harriet, as many of you know, was one of the conductors on the Underground Railroad. And she was born into slavery, an enslaved person, 1830s, 1840s. We can look that up. In Maryland, I do believe. And actually, it must have been before that. It must have been more like 1820s, 1830s, because I believe she lived to be about 91. But what a crazy life this lady lived. She was a nurse. She was a scout for the Union Army, armed. So a black woman during the Civil War with a gun on her hip, leading people because she knew the backwoods, the back roads, the creeks, the valleys, the river bottoms. She knew the way to sneak through places because she'd been kind of doing it. Uh, Horrible, horrible injustices dished out on this lady, and fought for freedom, fought for women's equality, voting rights, just uh, so many cool things that this woman did in her life. Injustices thrust upon her and millions of people like her by our founders. Think about that juxtaposition. Now, I'm not trying to lay a fallacy argument on you. I'm not trying to say anything other than these were flawed humans. And something we've been talking about here at home the last couple of days, just kind of ponder this, is like, how can people, these founders of ours, have this idea of liberty, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, clearly they didn't see all men as men, right? As long as you were a certain type of men. And I don't want to go off the rails or in the weeds and derail the point too far, but we have to understand that we did not come from some perfect history. Oftentimes we look back and we have these fake ideas of what was. I think it's important that we study history. I'm going to give you a list of some topics that I think you should check out to read or listen to on Audible. How many times have you ever been to a funeral? Has any of you ever done this? You've gone to a funeral, somebody you must care about if you're at the funeral, right? But maybe it's not your dad or mom or grandparent. Like maybe it's not somebody you loved. Maybe it's somebody that was in your life, but you went to the funeral and sadly, maybe they weren't the greatest person, but they still meant something to you and that's why you're there. But all of a sudden, people start talking and they're like, man, he was so amazing. He was so wonderful. And you're like, who the heck are you talking about? Like, I knew this guy too. He lied, he cheated, he didn't pay his bills on time. He was a freaking dirtbag. You know, he showed up to work on time. That's about the only good thing. You know what I'm talking about. But for some reason, we try to remember people in a way other than what's true. I'm not suggesting that our founders were a bunch of turds, but they weren't perfect. I think it's important that as we come to these arguments, we have one side of this equation from my cold dead hands, right? We have the other side that's like, oh no, they should be well regulated. Okay, well regulated meant in the context of the vernacular of the day, right? We have words that change, the meaning changes. Cool, right? Ooh, it's cool. No, man, cool means like badass, awesome, right? Rad. Rad, what the hell does rad mean? Well, it means something. If you were born from, 1970 to 1990, you heard that word. Some of you younger dudes are like, only old dudes say it. Well, fine, call me old. I don't care, which validates my point. I hear youngsters saying words now, or sometimes people will comment. I have to Google it because I have lost touch with the vernacular. The vernacular of the time, well regulated, meant what? It meant disciplined, trained, capable. Disciplined, trained, capable, ready to go, right? Meant the guns were clean. They were in order. These guys had the ability to line up and, do their thing, whatever it looked like. It did not mean well-regulated, a bunch of red tape from city hall and state government and federal government. That's not at all what it meant, not even remotely close. But now we interpret words to justify the means. On the flip side, though, here's the little kick in the junk for us gun lovers. The kick in the junk is, if we look back at the founders and at the writings of the time, not everybody thought you should just be walking around with a handgun. In fact, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of writing between 1720s, 30s, 40s on, between the founders talking about these things. So some books or Audible things for you to check out. I'll read them to you. The Second Amendment, written by Michael Waldman. Don't go read The Second Amendment. The book is called The Second Amendment by Michael Waldman. Guns, Politics, and Independence by G.L. Gammon. The Battle Cry of Freedom, James McPherson. Okay, here's two good ones: the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. These were documents, letters, correspondence written by a bunch of the founders, the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, two dichotomies of thought on whether or not we should have a codified constitution or whether or not we should just kind of like let her rip, tater chip, whatever happens, right? You got some guys that were like, we don't want to put everything on paper because then it'll just be more paper and more paper. Let's just let nature run itself. And then there are other guys like, dudes, if we don't have something, people are going to be like stealing each other's tomatoes out of the backyard. They're going to be like borrowing each other's horses, cutting frickin' fences down, like we got to do something. So the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers. Let's go deeper. So our founders were red men, right? A couple of people meant a lot to these guys: Montesquieu, Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau. These are some of them. The two treaties of government. And this was John Locke. So there's a compiled work. You can just get the one book or listen to it on Audible. It's Two Treaties of Government and a Letter Concerning Toleration. Very good read, and you will start to see the mind of our founders, which I think is good to start to understand that. Here's a good one that's a bunch of really cool little stories. The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Founding Fathers, Brian McClanahan. And then here's one that was written by a guy that's kind of self-described not pro-gun at all, but he wanted to take a very open-minded look at it, and he wrote a book called A Well-Regulated Militia. His name's Saul Cornell. I've got dozens and dozens of such things. I just grabbed a handful of them and typed them out for you to look at. Why do I think it's important? Because if we're going to start to argue things coherently, I had a guy today, well-intentioned, telling me more kids are going to die. And I said, well, first of all, a ruling from a federal judge isn't going to kill anybody. It's a challenge to other legislative and judicial thought. So I think that's got to be noted. Nobody all of a sudden said we can just go out and buy machine guns. It's somebody saying, though, wait a second, this is a gun that is in common use, and as per the definition of our Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Second Amendment specifically, based on the way we interpret it, unless we change it, these things are free to be owned. Which, again, broader question. Are we a republic or aren't we? As was stated outside of the Philadelphia Hall that day, a republic if you can keep it. I believe these men spent their lives chasing this perfection of liberty, so that they didn't know that one day in the future things like this would exist, or things like this. In those days, pistols were very unreliable. Something like this, they couldn't have even imagined, right? The flow of communication that we're having now, back in those days, the printing press was powerful, which is why Benjamin Franklin became as powerful as he was. He was a printer. The power to communicate without an understanding, without facts and figures, without understanding where these guys' hearts and minds were at the time of the founding. How can we properly articulate? In fact, that is the job of the Supreme Court and these other judges, is to understand where these men's minds were at, to say this is what they were thinking. Their whole job to interpret the law is to say, when this document was conceived, this is what they were thinking and why. Did you think about that? I mean, did you think about, we imagine this practice of law, it's not like mathematics where we can say a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's a fact, right? that is not open to suggestions. That is an immutable fact, unless you don't believe in math, and then that's weird and I have nothing for you. But now we start to believe or try to interpret the whims of man. And the way you see something might not be the way I see it, which is why I believe we need to arm ourselves with facts and be able to suppress our emotions to listen, to hear, to think, to reason. That is what really separates us from the animals, and that is what elevated our nation out of the mud. That is what helped us to suppress the evils of slavery. That is what helped us to create and continue the perfection of the Union. I hope that our conversations are helpful to you. As I've told you in the past, oftentimes it's me just wanting to talk about some of these things. And I hope that the conversations stir something in you, not for my sake or not because of me, but because of what these men and women did. Harriet Tubmans, the Franklins, these people that invested life in this magical pursuit of liberty. Be well. Don't be dickheads. Tell somebody you love them. If you haven't checked out our dudes at Weber Customs, or check this out. Oh, man, Defiance Action. Please do. There's nobody behind the camera. I'm alone today, just down here in the recording room, having it out with you. Ignis Lux Coffee, up for sale. We roast that just for you. I personally am roasting that. It's become a passion. It's a therapeutic pastime. Ignis Lux, I guess final pitch. As we crafted the name of this brand and we kind of spelled out that logo, the lamp of liberty was something talked about quite a bit by the founders. Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp to guide my way. I have but one lamp to guide my way, and that's the lamp of experience. And when we talk about what the meaning behind this coffee is, that fire denotes that flame of liberty, that torch of liberty that lives inside of us. Drink it or don't, but do know this: your life matters and what you do matters. Be well.